Hi. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the audio. I always like to make sure I have backup audio. So this is our backup audio. Hello. Okay. So I actually I saw that let's actually go back to this. I want to make sure. Okay, so there's a couple things that have been happening with Ben Affleck that I think are interesting. It's not just that he divorced Jennifer Lopez, and honestly, I can't stand Jennifer Lopez. This isn't a riding the I hate J-Lo train. It's more like there's some things that he did recently that are interesting. The first thing that he did is his Nepo baby children were basically talking about how they want premium Jordans or something, and he told them, I am rich, but you are not. Like, you cannot afford those. like, and I think that that is interesting because I just want to, like, how do you say, signal project for a second. And what that means is that, like, sometimes it feels like um, all of, like, there's, like, the wealthy people and there's the non-wealthy people, right? And I just want us to have a little bit more nuance as to, like, the levels here. Because if you didn't know this, like, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, mostly all of the like self-made millionaires in America have all signed the pledge that they are not leaving their children their wealth, and instead they are donating most of their wealth. I think it's like 99% of it to their philanthropic efforts. So I saw that Jeff Bezos' parents, the Bill Gates Foundation, and a couple other really wealthy people, because Trump has ended U.S. aid food relief, they have now signed a pledge or something to donate $400 million worth of food to like the U.S. food aid programs that have been cut. And it does feel like Ben Affleck is also on that kind of like wave of letting his children know, like, you're not riding off of my money. I know, like, Madonna did the same thing with her kids, where like her kids paid their own way through college, I think, like, and there's a bunch of articles about that. But like, why am I bringing this to this channel? I really feel like it's kind of unfortunate, but there's quite a lot of like black people and just like really young women in general who kind of feel like they deserve, like, oh, I deserve this, I should just be getting this, I should just have this. And no, like, you don't deserve, like, you need to work for your things like everyone else. And you don't have to feel alone, because like all of us are out here working. The really interesting thing about the Issa Rae story about Hollyweird right now is, if you want to make movies, if you want to make content, go make your content. If you want to like tell your story of like overcoming adversity, tell your story. There are people who want to hear your story. Like, for real. I just posted a video that was like how I found my people. Um so I don't know. There's literally nothing stopping you, especially if you have a cell phone. If you have a cell phone and a tripod, I mean, the world is kind of like your oyster. Not even kind of. It literally is. So this is kind of on you to to figure out how to get your shit together, because um, you definitely can, and there's like really no one who's like in your way. So anyway, okay, let's read this article. It's kind of long, so we might be here for a while. Okay, so it says, inside Ben Affleck's plan to remake Hollywood. Since founding a production company with a genuinely radical vision, Ben Affleck has chosen to make films as an executive director, a director's second, as an executive first, a director's second, and an actor third. But can you really just stop being one of the biggest movie stars on earth? This is by Zach Marin and photography by Gregory Harris. Also want to say, the images here look really good, and I'll probably edit this and put some of the imagery so you can just see this dude for yourself. Because yeah, Ben Affleck was kind of giving here. And there's some other stuff he says, like, where he's not like ashamed to like lean into the fact that he's like a middle-aged man. I appreciate that. From the window of the conference room at Artist Equity, Ben Affleck's production company, you can see Los Angeles spread out for miles to the south, the ocean to the right, downtown to the left, birds gently flying over everything in between. It's a Monday in January, not quite 2 weeks after fires first began to sweep over the city, and the birds are oddly calming. The first few tentative signs of life returning. Affleck, tall, a little rumpled, extending a large mitt of a hand, is as jittery as the rest of us, though largely unscathed despite reports to the contrary. I noticed that there's a lot of stories about me, he says, almost apologetically, my house burning down and all these various things. His house did not burn down, in fact, nor did the one he rents down the block from that house, though, like many, he had to leave for a little while. But he's used to having to clear up stuff like this. I was thinking to myself that this person's impression, meaning mine, of my week is probably formed by 3 Daily Mail articles that are mostly absurd. Affleck first became widely known with 1997's Good Will Hunting, which he wrote and starred in alongside his friend Matt Damon. He is nearing his 30th uninterrupted year in the spotlight, which has given him a career and 2 Academy Awards and also a level of tabloid scrutiny that, in its consistency and vehemence, is almost unmatched. Some people like to follow the soap opera, Affleck says, and that soap opera is actually independent of a movie you might make or be in. They're interested in just the soap opera, and you become a character in that soap opera. You didn't write it, you don't direct it, and you don't even know you're in it, but you are. The soap opera has provided Affleck with a backstory that is almost classical in its shape. Sudden rise, dramatic fall, 2003 Jiggly, starring Affleck's then future love interest, Jennifer Lopez, is usually cited here. Gradual comeback primarily as a director with 2007's Gone Baby Gone, 2010's The Town, 2012's Argo, which won Best Picture, and then rise again like the phoenix tattoo that was once grandly photographed on his bare back. None of this is exactly right, though all of its elements of truth, and Affleck has been shadowboxing with this version of himself. The soap opera character version for most of his adult life. To this day, he still meets people who assume he is his dim, rock-breaking character from Good Will Hunting, a movie that has cast Damon in the genius role. Matt's math skills, I'm pretty sure, are very far from genius level, or the attention-plagued playboy that was his public role in the first decade of the century. In reality, Affleck, 52, a twice-divorced father of 3 who commutes to an office most days. I'm a middle-aged guy, he says, not unhappily. Despite the comeback narrative that journalists still reference, week to week and year to year, he has long been ensconced in the very top levels of Hollywood as a leading man in the lobby of Artist Equity. There is, among other things, Affleck's old Batman suit, and more recently, an executive. Affleck founded Artist Equity, which he runs with Damon and Gary Cardinale, a little over 2 years ago, with the idea of wrestling some control back from the notoriously opaque and complex studio financing system. Air in 2023, the last film Affleck directed was an Artist Equity film. So is The Accountant 2, the sequel to the improbably successful 2016 action film, which Affleck stars in next month. Throughout all of it, Affleck has retained what I can only describe as his humanity. He's a former sexiest man alive who is also routinely caught on camera dropping packages or spilling coffee. He's still, despite years of being burned by celebrity industrial complex that has never left him alone, incredibly honest and talkative in front of an interviewer. At the end of our first conversation, he almost apologizes for how much he's been speaking. I mean, I feel like I'm not a great interview in some ways because I'll just talk about whatever you bring up. That last part is true. GQ. One story I read this week, speaking of tabloids, was that the FBI visited your house. Ben Affleck. Good example. As it turns out, the FBI did in fact visit my house, but this is pretty revealing, right? So I come home and I see there's this story with sources that say, hey, the FBI was at your house. I'm like, well, this is strange. So I call them and I say, hey, FBI, were you at my house? Do you want to talk to me? Oh, we don't know. I get transferred along. Finally, somebody who's actually responsible for what was happening was like, oh, we had no idea that was your house. There was a break-in of a federal official's home in that area, so the FBI went around, and whoever lived there, the FBI rang their bell. But because there are photographers sitting outside, and these guys have their FBI jackets on, then it's the FBI's visited your house. Whoever wrote the story made up something about how it was related to an investigation about a drone that I guess I did crash into one of the helicopters 2 or 3 miles up Mandeville Canyon. Turns out, no, it wasn't about that. In fact, we were very far from where the drone was. So it's like, you've seen this event about the FBI at my house. I had no idea. My only involvement was to track it down and figure it out. So does it feel odd to you that some stranger will show up in front of you and be like, I know you got a FedEx package yesterday. That's so strange. I'm sorry, that's so weird. That's weird as fuck. I'd be like, what? I'm aware that's absurd and it's ridiculous. There's nothing newsworthy about all the day-to-day events of my life or the conversation I have with one person or another person that's photographed. And often it's like the big trick is to say, so-and-so does this and that, imply some correlation between the two. In other words, some broad event is taking place in some way, whether globally or around this person's life. And look, here they are frustrated with the parking meter. I'm definitely aware of the cosmic joke of it all. What I've ended up focusing on is, look, I know what's going on in my life, and also, really more importantly, my kids now. We used to have a thing, my ex-wife and I, when they would see something on a supermarket stand, and we would say, well, you know this isn't true, because if it were, you would have 15 brothers or sisters, or whatever the number of stories is that they said your mom was pregnant. And I'm really lucky that I have a really good co-parent and partner in Jennifer Garner, the kid's mom, who's wonderful and great, and we work together well. It's more of a headache than anything else, and there certainly are worse things. I have to figure out why I'm an object of. You don't have a theory? I don't think present in a very careful way. So I'll go out and pick up the packages or deliveries, and I don't really care that people are there to take my picture. And some people are probably, I guess you'd call them smarter or more strategic, because they think, well, I don't want to be seen wearing some t-shirt or spilling some drink. And I think, oh, fuck it, man, I could give a shit. I just want to get the coffee. So maybe that's a part of it, because people are accustomed to a more presented, curated image. My life is actually pretty drama-free. And so even if I have the same events that people have, I'm sure in your mind you're thinking, oh, well, you just got divorced. That's not drama-free. And I understand that instinct, but all of this is pretty adult. And for all the sensational stuff that gets written, if somebody sat down and talked to me about it, and I said, well, this is really the experience, their eyes would glaze over with boredom. So you know what I'm actually thinking about right now? You did just get divorced from Jennifer Lopez, and there's a scene in a documentary she put out last year called The Greatest Love Story Never Told. Really, there's more than just one scene. Actually, the entire premise of the film is she's like, we're private people, but we have public dimensions as artists, and I'm about to put a lot of us out there, and you're on camera, and your face is revealed to you, and I'm only guessing, but it looks like you're taking a deep breath, like, oh fuck, here we go again, but also, I love and support this person. That's so strange. I couldn't understand why she put out that movie. part of it was, okay, if I'm going to participate in this, I want to try to do it in an honest way and in a way that's interesting. But I thought it was an interesting examination. Like I mentioned to you before, there are a lot of people who think I've handled celebrity more adeptly and more adroitly than I have. Jennifer is among them. My temperament is to be a little bit more reserved and private than hers, as happens in relationships. You don't always have the same attitude toward those things. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting because how do you reconcile that? Because exactly what you said is true. I love and support this person. I believe in them. They're great. I want people to see that. And I think the thing that I said in that documentary, or the piece they used, was where I said, you don't marry a ship captain and then say, well, I don't like going out in the water. You've got to own what you knew going into any relationship. And I think it's important to say that wasn't the cause of some major fracture. It's not like you can watch the documentary and go, oh, now I understand the issues that these two had. We're sitting in the conference room of your production company, Artists Equity. Do you actually 9 to 5 it here? And he says, I do. The reason I first did this was because I recognized the most important thing to me was both being a parent and being present, and that for my own sake, going off to Austin or Louisiana or somewhere to do a movie, I was really missing time I could never get back. My kids were 8, 11, and 14, and I felt like I don't want to miss any of this time at all. And so I thought, well, let me figure out a way to work at home and have the kind of job where I can actually be there to build my schedule around that. That's a real thing. I think a lot of people always comment on how younger children, like 0 to 5, are the most important years, and they are developmentally. I definitely think like love, care, protection, and security are important. But I kind of feel like it's at the time when the emotional development happens that if you are cool, like if you're a good adult person with like all these like life lessons and skills, that is the critical moment when you get to pour all of that information into these like young minds, and that's what makes good parenting, in my opinion. Have you ever taken any time off in your career? Not on purpose. We were formed by our experiences, right? I remember struggling to be an actor, and those years seemed bigger and longer than they were. It was a fraction of my life at this point, but in my teenage years, early 20s, all that time where you don't know if it's ever going to work or if anyone is going to give me a chance, really my ambition was just to have, say, well, I am an actor, a filmmaker, writer slash waiter, but I'm actually going to get to do that job for a living. And I think when I first had the opportunity to work and for, I don't know, 15 years or something after that, I was more afraid that I wouldn't get the opportunity if I stopped moving. Your father wanted to be a writer and director as well, but it didn't work out for him. Do you think that feeling of not ever wanting to stop is somehow related to the way that you grew up? I'm sure it is. My father had ambitions to be an actor and to be a director and to be a writer, and my experience in my childhood was of knowing and seeing a father when he was around that I believe at the time was plagued by a sense of not having accomplished what he wanted. That's interesting. He was an auto mechanic, a bartender, and a janitor, and the head of a custodial team at a college and stuff. And so I definitely am aware of the fact. And I've talked about this with other actors who come from environments where they feel like there was a parent that couldn't do it, you know what I mean? And that felt insecure. It's a lot harder for those people to turn things down. And ironically, the ability to say no, it's a real paradox in this business, but the ability to say no is actually much more useful. You started Artist Equity 2.5 years ago. The theory was everyone shares risk, everyone shares reward. How have people done so far? Well, we're doing really great. Part of the fundamental thesis of this company was the artist, the director, the actors, they're going to get a broader freedom to spend the money in a way they think maximally benefits the movie. The downside is you have to take some of the responsibilities if it goes over budget. Well, that eats into your ownership. My belief was this is going to really align incentives in a way that's going to be healthier for everybody. The cruise rates, the last time we looked, were about 15% higher than their highest quotes because we do a bonusing system. So if you're a crew, and we've had a couple of different models that we've experimented with, but the first was sort of like, here's our goals, and if we reach them, there's extra compensation in it for everybody on the crew. You'll get an additional bonus. It creates a more collaborative experience. What do you think the future of the company is? I feel like, okay, so we've delivered a lot of production, and we've delivered a lot of movies, and we've done a bunch of public, and we've done a bunch the public hasn't seen, but I feel really good about what we're about to deliver and a bunch that we're about to start production on. So in that sense, I feel like that's step one. Step two, we have a data project that's sort of interesting, or that's sort of integrating, sorry. This is referring to AI. Are you seemingly one of the few people in the industry to be like, I'm open to the idea? No, actually, when I talk about AI, I'm really talking in broad terms about what we need to do as an industry. I myself am not personally doing AI, obviously, but I'm really looking very closely at what this is going to mean for this business and this art form. The first time I saw it, I felt terrified. I thought we're going to be destroyed. But what we do is clearly just being duplicated here, and oh my gosh, we spend all this energy and time and commitment going out, filming stories, and trying to bring them to life. And here, the computer can sort of do this with a keystroke. And what I learned is you actually can't do that with a keystroke. And in fact, what we do is probably more resistant to disintermediation by AI than most other businesses, frankly, and in most other jobs. But also that it actually should be a useful tool. Part of my eagerness around it is because I really would like to participate in defining, for example, the residual streams that I know are going to accompany this. If they are not defined now, it'll be much harder to do it. An example I've heard you use was, well, okay, people can sort of do their own episode of Succession. And I was like, okay, that seems dark and dystopian to me. Now, if you're on Succession, this is where the guilds, I think, should negotiate for you. You should have the ability on any show, whatever, to say, I want to opt out of being regenerated, because what that means is I may not have said that line or done that. I'm not comfortable with that, but also you have to say, if I opt in, I should be compensated alongside everyone else who's making money from this, because I'm okay with it. You should be able to dictate that, and there should be clearly delineated residual structures that compensate people for that. So if someone came to you and was like, I'm doing Good Will Hunting cinematic universe, and I want the rights to young Matt and young Ben, what would you say? I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with that, although, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that, so I'm not sure. It also feels weird because that movie feels connected to a time when that wasn't possible. But you've seen people's estates sell, and frankly, great. If your beneficiaries want to sell your likeness to do voiceovers for a Visa card or something, I don't know. Who am I to say? Go knock yourself out, I'll be gone. So if it's still worth something to my grandkids, go ahead and sell it. There's something interesting about hearing you in executive mode and then industry profit mode. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then to think about you going on to work on The Accountant 2 set as a working actor. Is there a push-pull there? When I got into this, I wanted to be a director, and I had directed short films and was trying to write and obviously be an actor. It was a time when this sort of DIY thing was just starting. You had Cassavetes, you had independent filmmakers, but in the 90s is when you had Reservoir Dogs and Clerks and Slacker. In the 1989, Do the Right Thing, and there were these movies that were made by people outside of what they call the studio system. And they were interesting and they were ambitious. And what I learned about when I was coming up and had ambitions to start doing this was, oh look, if you get Harvey Keitel to do your movie, you can get $1 million and you can make Reservoir Dogs. So even writing Good Will Hunting, we always had to keep in mind all these commercial concerns. We thought, Well, it's not going to be a very expensive movie because no one's going to invest in an expensive movie with us in it. So it's going to be a small movie that takes place in rooms and streets of Boston and doesn't have all those other high production value costs associated with it. And we need to have a movie star, otherwise no one's going to make it. And so with the movie star part, we have to make that a supporting part so they don't have to work as many weeks, but give them all the monologues and speeches. So the corporate mode thing, in terms of thinking about the relationship between what you're creating and what it costs and how you're going to get it out to people, has always been a part of the way I thought about it. That is very interesting, and I never knew that. Matt Damon, who you wrote Good Will Hunting with, is an interesting counterexample to you in the sense that he has rarely seemed to want to do anything but act. As much as I want to be an actor, I find it the most satisfying directing movies. Now, I thought you were going to compare our acting careers, to which I would have said, well, Matt learned and knew earlier than I did to really key in on the director as the fundamental basis on which to make a decision whether to do a movie or not, which was a very wise choice. And so he certainly had opportunities to do movies like that. It's not like I was saying, no Scorsese, no Spielberg, I'm not going to be in your movie. We were in situations of our opportunities and we're subject to that. What pulls you back to acting at this point? I really feel like I started liking my work most when I arrived at the point of I could kind of take it or leave it, where directing became a central focus, and I thought, well, I'm going to act in things that I just really love. Why do you think it took so long to get to that place? A late bloomer. Actually, yeah, in some ways, I think I'm also kind of aware in awe of actors who can generate the sense of life experience that they haven't had. That's a gift. That's not a gift I have. I think I'm able, as an actor at best, to take the sort of fragments of experiences that I've had, big impacts on me, and resemble them in ways that kind of suit the needs of the character that I'm playing. I was reflecting on the fact that you were maybe not thought of as a very personal actor, but that there's a lot of your life and roles you've taken, whether Good Will Hunting, which has some of your dad in it, or Hollywoodland and Gone Girl, which are kind of about fame and reckoning with the spotlight, or more recently The Way Back, in which you play an alcoholic. A lot of those later on become evident, maybe more evident, and I knew with The Way Back, like, okay, look, people know I'm an alcoholic or in recovery, and I'm going to have a conversation about this. I didn't really mind that. I maybe underestimated the degree to which I didn't have any ambitions to be the national spokesperson for recovering alcoholics. And not because I have any shame with it or anything. I just find that I've been sober for more than 5 years, and it's not something that's at the forefront of my mind. It's not the central preoccupation of my life. But at the time, it was something that I was definitely wrestling with and thinking about. And I was also totally aware that my own lived experience meant that I was able to bring something to it that I thought would make it feel more real and connect with more people. Now, I hadn't lost a child, thank God, but this is, which is really, which is what was at the core of that story, which I can't imagine anything worse than that in life. So it's a combination. You bring some things to it and you imagine others. If I could have, I would have kept the fact that I'm sober anonymous because I think it works better that way. I didn't think for that to become something people knew about, but I can't complain about it either. I understand doing this job and doing this life. If something happened like that, people are going to know about it, and they did. And I've arrived at a place where I think of that experience as a part of my life in authentically grateful ways, whereas I don't think such a thing was possible before. So that sort of is what it is. A few days later, Affleck and I met again, this time in his office at Artist Equity, where a cabinet holds 2 Oscars next to the distinctive popcorn shape of an MTV Movie Award. Some of the fire-related tabloid storm around him has subsided, and he seems more at ease. Or maybe it's just the majestic cardigan from Brunello Cucinelli that he's wearing. Very elite, very fashion forward, he says. self-deprecating one. That's kind of funny. Maybe we'll read the rest of this tomorrow because there's some other things I kind of want to record. That was 30 minutes, guys.